Thank you for being here. Today we will have a very special webinar with Dr. Anne Hilty about conflict resolutions in BPW. Anne Hilty is a psychologist, writer, researcher, and entrepreneur. She is the founding and past president of BPW Hong Kong and was the organizer of the 2014 BPW International Congress in Jeju, Korea. In addition to BPW Hong Kong, Dr. Anne is also a member of BPW clubs in New York City and Thessaloniki, Greece. A member of BPW International Task Force on Peace, team leader of 4 BPW projects, and co-facilitator of this leadership webinar series. Thank you very much to all of you, and thank you for our main speaker, Anne. The floor is yours.
Hello to my BPW sisters. I'm Dr. Anne, and I'm a psychologist, and today I'm here to talk to you about resolving conflict. Conflict is a normal human condition, in fact, and it also is found in organizations, including ours, and at all levels. So let's talk about it. Some days, if you're in a leadership position, conflict feels like this. You're just trying to keep all the lions and tigers and leopards at bay from attacking one another and attacking you, or so it can feel. There are 3 areas of resolving conflict that I'd like to talk to you about today. The first is dealing with difficult people. Some people, by their nature, just seem to be difficult and to have difficulty in relationships, and can also be problematic in your organization, your affiliate. The second category is conflict resolution. What is conflict and how do we resolve it? And the final category is mediation. When our other efforts have failed, we may need to bring in a third or neutral party to help us mediate the situation and to resolve the conflict. When mediation fails, although we're not looking at this today, there are 2 other options. And one is arbitration, which is a legal form of mediation in the courts. And one is litigation, which is lawsuit. We hope never to actually have to go to either of those. First of all, dealing with difficult people. We have all dealt with difficult people at one time or another in many different areas of life, including BPW. And we can all identify with this picture, I'm sure, in any one of these 3 positions at different times. There are a number of types of so-called difficult people. First is our perfectionists. And while someone who's trying to reach perfection all the time can seem like a benefit to your affiliate, because they'll always do a really good job of things, or at least try their best, they'll also always fall short of that mark, because no one can reach perfection. And to always strive for this means to always be dissatisfied in yourself and others. So that's a difficult personality to have to deal with. The second, in typical American slang, is control freaks. The freak. Controllers, the ones who have to control every situation, are also difficult to deal with. Might be you or me. We might be any one of these ourselves. I'll talk more about that later. But the controller wants to really be in charge of everything and to determine the path and the outcome of everything that you do in your affiliate or federation or at international level. So that can also be difficult or challenging to handle if you're the one in leadership position. Creatives, sounds positive, mostly is. But the creatives are the rules breakers, the ones who don't like authority, the ones who don't really see the point in having all this structure or all these regulations and really want to do things their own way. Again, can be difficult. The shapers, well, they relate a little bit to the first 3, but the shapers are really always trying to make you into a different person, make the club into something different, always trying to shape and mold everyone and everything around them. Aggressive, those are our bullies, our autocrats, our dictators. Very difficult to deal with. Defensive, and who always says, wasn't me, never me, I'm not to blame, it's somebody else, and never take responsibility. Submissive, Well, if you're in a leadership position, you need followers, so to speak, although the true leader empowers everyone else to lead too. But the submissive is someone who never really lets you know where they stand. In fact, they often don't know themselves. Can't take a stand on anything, can't voice an opinion. Anything you decide is okay with me. I'm just here to meekly follow. But in fact, usually what you decide is not okay with them, but they won't let you know that either. So generally indecisive and unable to commit. And the last category, I think, is something we can't really resolve. We have to walk away from. And that's the truly unethical or corrupt person. The person who is doing something or maybe many things that harm the organization or the affiliate or the federation. And once you recognize that, they need to be asked to leave because there is no real resolving of that. Here's another way of looking at difficult personalities, and we've all known and or possibly been one of these or more at some point in our lives. First of all, we have the know-it-alls, the ones who are actually arrogant. They think they know more than everyone else. They may know a lot. They may be very intellectual or broadly read, have a wide experience, but they carry that over other people. And if they're wrong and proven wrong, they resort typically to a very defensive position. Secondly, we have the passives, the ones that never offer any ideas. We touched on that in the previous one. Thirdly, the dictators, the aggressives, bullying and intimidating, demanding and overly critical. The yes people. The yes people will agree to anything you ask them to do, but they won't usually be able to follow through on that commitment. They tend to say yes to everything, which is also becoming overly committed, and everything suffers as a result. They're eager to please. The no people are focused on the negatives. We can't do this because she's not such a good leader because this is wrong because, and very rigid and inflexible. And then the gripers, which is another word for complainers. And the complainers, nothing's ever right. That's different from the no people. The no people look at the negative side. The complainers just think that everything is wrong, but they can't bring themselves to focus on solutions to those problems. Lots of difficult personalities. Even more, in my profession, we have a number of actual disorders of personality. This is when personality traits become such a problem that they disrupt or disable someone's life. And that's a disorder needing treatment, needing care. First is borderline personality disorder. This often is called one of the most difficult to deal with in the field of psychology. It doesn't mean borderline maybe is, maybe isn't. It actually is different from that. It's borderline because it is marked by instability. The personality is unstable. The relationships are unstable. Their own self-image is unstable and their emotions as a result. And a lot of impulsive behavior and also very manipulative in the end. Really a challenge to deal with. Antisocial, someone who doesn't really have a deeply felt sense of right or wrong. And sadly, some people are born this way. And something wrong in the biology, it seems, but born or made that way based on what has happened to them in life. And I'll come back to that again and again in this presentation. The antisocial personality may or may not join groups, but even if they do, they're only really focused on what they want, and they don't have any real concept of the rights of others around them. Histrionic. Well, women have always, throughout history, been identified as hysterical as a way of keeping women in a submissive position. That's not what we're talking about here. Histrionic is the person who is excessively emotional and always attention-seeking. And we've all known people like this. When it goes to an extreme, as mentioned, we call it a disorder. Narcissistic, we have all known narcissists. Again, this is an extreme version if we're calling it a psychological disorder. This is the person who is very grandiose, maximizes their actual capabilities. They're the biggest, brightest, best, smartest, only one in the room who can handle anything. And underlying that is a huge insecurity and need for admiration of others. Also a lack of empathy, no real understanding of the feelings of others or the capabilities and experience of others. Avoidant personality, we probably won't see in a club or any kind of group because they're the ones who have extreme social inhibition. Dependent, we will see a lot in groups. Those are the ones who really always need taken care of. And they're generally submissive and clingy. They get their self-worth from other people. So they always want to be surrounded by the care and consideration of others. The rest of these show up more in a psychological context, so we won't touch on those. First of all, and foremost, in dealing with difficult people is understanding. And this comes in two forms. One, identifying the issue, and two, understanding the person. Identifying the issue doesn't mean understanding the problem exactly, but understanding the chaos created by difficult people. You have someone in your club or affiliation that has one of these types of difficult personalities. You could just decide they're a terrible person, but that's a shortcut in thinking. And I don't think any of us want to take shortcuts in our thinking. And also, that's not really handling the situation at all. And leaders need to try to manage the situation. So identifying and analyzing what problems are created by them, if any, what can be handled is what happens around that difficult person. Also, your reactions to difficult people. So how do you as a leader react to that? And sometimes that reaction is based on your own prior experience. They may remind you of someone else you've known in your life, and your reaction to them may be stronger than necessary as a result. We need to analyze the way we tend to react to these different types of difficult personalities and whether our own actions and reactions are healthy and appropriate or not. Thirdly, we need to take a long, hard look in the mirror and see if we're the difficult person, because it's always possible. We never, of course, have this impression of ourselves. Are we causing reactive behavior in other people? Do we see patterns in the way others react to us? And once we see patterns, we know that we might need to make some modifications in our own character. Understanding the person is the second category, and listening is the greatest skill one can develop as a leader. Leaders like to tell many people many things. We're all good at that. We people what to do, when to do it, how to organize, what their jobs are. But in fact, listening, active, deep, full listening, not just forming what you're going to say next, which isn't listening at all, and asking questions. So whenever faced with any one of these difficult personality traits, try to sit down and listen to them. Listen to their side of things if it's a conflict. Listen to their perception of things if they're just generally difficult to deal with. And ask questions in order to better understand them. That will help you so much as a leader. Don't judge. Goes hand in hand with that. And the human nature that we all share is quick to judge, no matter who we are. We tend to make a judgment or a perception of someone based on their behavior. And sometimes we forget that they're a human being. And what we really forget is that that difficult behavior has a source, and that source may be many, many years before they came along into your life. So giving them respect and dignity, displaying that you understand they have the dignity as a human being, and looking for the hidden need will help you a lot in dealing with that type of member or that type of personality or situation. There's always a hidden need. The narcissist, underneath all that grandiosity, doesn't really believe that she has self-worth and overinflates her opinion of herself to others in order to compensate for that basic need. The avoidant personality may have been deeply wounded in childhood or just grown up in a very solitary household or with dysfunctional parents, and so on. These difficult personalities, one of the classic ones is the one who wants to control everything, which comes from a basic lack of safety, often a history of abuse in childhood, in a marriage, some profoundly unsafe situation that was out of that person's control, and controlling everything around them feels safe. The most basic human need being security. Look for the hidden need. How do we manage difficult relationships, difficult personalities? Well, first of all, is managing your own reactions. The storm may swirl around you like a cyclone. That's any kind of stress, including difficult relationships. But you can control your core. Keep the eye of the storm, which is you, as calm as can be. And then you'll handle the situation better as a leader. Breathing techniques, any other relaxation techniques, we all know some of these. Find the ones that work best for you. And in any given situation, in the conflict, out of the conflict, maintain your center in a very calm and peaceful sense. And reflect on your own feelings. What am I feeling in this situation? What do I feel when I think about this person? What do I feel when faced with this kind of personality? And reflect on what that means and where that comes from in your life. Secondly, to mitigate or equalize the situation. First of all, separate fact from assumption. Along with judging, and in fact, they're closely related, we make a lot of assumptions when dealing with difficult people. Because it's human nature. But if we can focus as much as possible on the facts of the situation, of what they're saying, the facts about them, then we can separate fact from assumption and operate mostly in the former. Seeking help from others, this does not mean gossip. Gossip is 100% without exception destructive. If someone is not part of the solution, they don't need to know. But seeking help from others who have more wisdom and experience than you, our advisors, our mentors, we might be in our 70s with 40 years of leadership experience, but we still have mentors with any luck. They may or may not be older than us. They may be younger, but they have more experience or wisdom or just a different perspective on this situation. So seek help from others. Don't try to go it alone. If you're president, well, you're at the top, but you've got an entire executive. You've got past presidents. You've got people in other affiliates that you know that you can go to for help. To avoid gossip, don't mention names or any personal details. Just say, I've got a situation with a difficult member. The difficulty is blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure how to handle that. What do you advise? Keep it clean. Separating self from other when possible, the third point there, means don't take it personally. You are two separate individuals, each one with her own personality. Those personalities might not click, and one might be a little more difficult to deal with than the other, today anyway. And so separating from that situation will help us to remain objective. Don't try to change the other person. Well, anyone who's ever been married or in a close, intimate relationship knows this well. We certainly influence each other. But if you're setting out to change the so-called difficult person, you won't. It's probably their core personality by now. They can mitigate that, but it's still a core personality trait probably from long, long ago in their life, and it's not that easy to change. And more to the point, that's not your job as a leader or as another person. So you can influence the situation, you can create a better relationship, or you can walk away or ask them to walk away. More on that in a minute. But if you're setting out to change them, you have already failed, actually, this kind of situation. But also don't let her be toxic. If there's a toxicity by which we mean this person is not just difficult to get along with, but is actually a negative influence in your club or your federation or at international level. If this is a truly negative influence that's causing harm to your affiliate or to our organization, they have to go. There's no other way around that. That doesn't get resolved. Perspective and also leverage. Well, perspective, there are three classic ways to look at any difficult situation, including dealing with a difficult person. And one is realistic optimism. It doesn't mean through rosy lenses that everything is okay when it's not, because that's no kind of solution. But this is being realistic about the situation, but also optimistic. Seeing it as an opportunity to improve your conflict resolution skills or your skills in dealing with a difficult person. Seeing it as a chance for growing as a leader. Seeing it as a chance to see things in a different way. Ultimately, you may not end up seeing things the way that the other person sees them, but it gives you a chance to expand your own viewpoint. and so on. So try to look at this not only realistically, but also with a note of optimism. Reverse lens is when you try to look through the other person's eyes or see their view on things. And that goes a long way toward compassion and empathy for whatever has made them difficult to deal with. If you're seeing it through their eyes and you see that behind this person who's always bragging and boasting and thinks that they're better than everyone else, the narcissist, and you see a little girl that was always told that she was worthless and is overcompensating for that, for example, trying to see through the other person's eyes will ease quite a lot the tension and anxiety that comes with difficult personalities. The third lens is the long lens. Will this situation that's bothering me today, or this person that is difficult today, will this matter to me in 5 days, 5 weeks, months, years? If any of that is no, let it go. Let it be. Lay it down. So taking a long view and not getting caught up in the moment is another very useful, sometimes critical lens. Leverage. How can we leverage the situation for some advantage to us? Not in a manipulative way, but in a positive way as a leader. First of all, knowing yourself, self-awareness is critical. Understanding your feelings and reactions in this situation. Remaining calm, as I mentioned. Gaining clarity of the situation. I mentioned understanding of the issue, the chaos around the person themselves. And asking questions is the best tool there. Sticking to the facts, also mentioned, but also acknowledging feelings. Don't come from an emotional perspective, because actually that's not objective and it's not leadership. But acknowledge your feelings as a human being. I feel upset in this because I feel hurt in this situation. Underneath my anger is hurt, or a fear of the future of my club, and so on. Seek the advice of others, already mentioned. Again, avoid gossip. No personal information of any sort, unless that person that you're talking to is directly involved in the situation. Don't spread harm. You become part of the problem in that case. And keep records. Now, if you are recording conversations without the other person knowing, that's unethical. You've now really become part of the problem and not what we call leadership material. But let them know you want to keep a record of any meeting you have with them, or at the outside, make extraneous notes immediately after as witnessed by another person, so that at least it's recorded in the first 10 minutes after a conversation as you remember it. Somehow keep a record. Some strategies we can use. Never say, I understand. That doesn't convey empathy as we might think it does, but it's, again, a mental shortcut. You don't understand. We can never fully understand another person's situation. And it's a little bit condescending too. So rather than that, ask them to tell you more so that you can try to understand. That's a very respectful and empathetic position. And it's also just more accurate. The more you can hear from the other person, the more you will begin to understand. Avoid smiling or humor. This may seem counterintuitive, but in fact, if the other person is upset about something or seeing something in a negative way and you're smiling or trying to make a joke to lighten the tension, perhaps, to deal with the anxiety you're feeling as well, it usually will backfire. It will seem as if you aren't taking them seriously. You think this is a joke, you're belittling them or being condescending. It almost never works in the way that we would like it to. So just avoid it, but don't look grim. So if you have an open and engaged expression on your face, you are actively listening and not just waiting to speak or forming what you're going to say, but you're actually listening and reflecting back to them what they just said. What I understand from what you've said is this. That sort of engaged listening shows that you're actually trying to resolve whatever's before you, particularly trying to understand. Don't be defensive. Defensive never works. I didn't do that. It's you. Done. Game over. You have lost. You have failed in your goal as a leader to deal with this person or this situation. So Also returning anger with anger. Now, it's very hard if someone is shouting at you not to get angry in return. That's very hard. But as a leader, that's a skill that you want to continually develop so that you always storm around you, calm eye of the storm. Always maintain your calm. Don't argue or try to convince the other. Very seldom useful. Each person presenting their view, coming to some middle point, much more useful. But trying to convince the other to your way of thinking is usually not very helpful. And it also gives them the message that their way of thinking doesn't have value. The next point here, if you take anything away from this presentation, it should be this, in my view. Kindness, compassion, commonality, and calm. Kindness, compassion, empathy. Commonality, what do we have in common? We are both human beings who deserve respect. We are both women who are, in one way or another, interested in furthering the cause of women. There may be other things in common. Maybe you're both mothers. Maybe you're both leaders in your fields. Maybe you're in a similar profession. Look for the commonality and remain calm. Kindness, compassion, commonality. Share your view, treat the other with respect, set limits and boundaries. What is not acceptable to you? If, as it should be, shouting is not acceptable to you, and the other person becomes angry and you say, I'm sorry, but I'm willing to continue discussing this. I am not willing to allow you to shout at me. And if they continue, say it again, and the third time walk away until they can calm down and then come back to the discussion. Don't just abandon entirely. So know where your boundaries are and be clear about that with the other person. Remain flexible, because each situation, and even if it's a type of personality you've had to deal with before, the controller, for example, it still is not going to be the same because each human being is different. So be flexible in how you handle each case. Use different ones of these strategies depending on the situation. Debrief. After such an encounter with a difficult person, it's really important for your own well-being and also for your own clarity to debrief with another person, to discuss it afterward. This is still not gossip. So go to another person who is not part of the situation, maybe not in your club or federation even, and just, again, as in seeking advice, just tell them what happened and how you felt about it. Don't tell them names or personal details. Don't become part of the problem. This is generally advice to leaders. If you want to be a good leader, don't become part of the problem. And discharge your own stress. Go for a walk or a run. Pound a pillow with your fist. Yell and scream in a closed car or a closed room. Whatever works for you. Go work out at the gym. Whatever works for you to let go of your own stress in any difficulty. Finally, in this section, we have changing our own mindset. That's the thing that's really the part that's really in our control. The first is accepting that there will always be difficult people. We know this intellectually, but in reality, each situation will temporarily overwhelm us until we remember and also remember our skills and try to deal with that situation and that person. But there will always be difficult people around us. We will never have a perfect club or a perfect federation. In fact, that would be boring. There is a wide range of women, even though we're all women, we're all professionals, and we're all in this cause of women's empowerment and gender equality together. We are still different personalities at the end of the day, and even different values. So there will always be difficulties, there will always be conflict, there will always be difficult people, because something in their past has made them that way. Again, that's a useful perspective. We may never know, they may never know, what in theory has been in their past that has made them difficult in relationships today. So seeing the wound rather than the defensive result. Increase your frustration tolerance in life in general, particularly in leadership and certainly in dealing with difficult people. Don't let things frustrate you. Whatever you need to do to grow your tolerance toward frustration, to not be easily frustrated, leadership skill. Examine your own behavior, another general leadership skill. Am I part of the problem? Am I reacting in unhealthy ways? Am I gossiping to others about what I'm trying to handle here in my own affiliate? Examine your own behavior. Are you contributing to the problem rather than the solution? And be aware of your perceptions of others. Is it really just my perception of this person? Do other people have a similar perception? Or is it something that I'm misunderstanding? Is this person reminding me of someone else in my life? And really, my feelings are more about that than about this situation or this person. Be super aware of your perceptions of others. Secondly, we come to conflict resolution itself, by which I mean not just dealing one-to-one with a difficult person or personality, but also addressing a conflict. Now, a conflict could be within your whole affiliate. Maybe there's a split right down the middle about some issue, a 50-50 vote for and against. Maybe there's an interest among some of the members in getting more members at all costs. They want to have a bigger club. Maybe others want to keep it small and intimate. Maybe still others are a bit elitist and they want only a certain type of member. Or they want members who will only dedicate themselves to the work of your affiliate. Some will and some won't in any case. But there can be different values such as this, and that can create conflict. What is conflict? Well, first of all, conflict, we understand, is disagreement or different values and so on. We'll look at sources of conflict in the next slide. The conflict, first of all, results in emotions, strong emotions. Anger, frustration, feeling overwhelmed, feeling hurt, feeling exhausted emotionally. So somehow this stirs the emotional part of us, and then we have to, as quickly as possible, try to engage our intellect and not suppress our emotions, but not operate from that place, because that won't actually be successful in the end. So acknowledge your emotions, then just put them to one side and deal with this from a neutral intellectual stance. But emotions always will come first in conflict. We have two choices then: to engage or avoid that person or the situation or the conflict itself. If we avoid, it's a feedback loop. Temporarily, we have to avoid sometimes for our sanity or for our own safety, physically or emotionally. But if you just avoid, then that goes right back to the conflict, which remains unresolved. Maybe now it's buried a little, but it's still there. So avoidance is not ultimately a solution. Feedback loop. If we engage, but we try to control, dominate, persuade the other person or the other half of our club to see things our way, or otherwise handle in a heavy-handed way, that's also a feedback loop. Excuse me. That also comes back to conflict, because it's not resolution. It's power over instead of power from within and servant leadership that empowers everyone. So we need to work more toward that model of empowering everyone, even when we 100% disagree, and engage in a process that will come to some kind of resolution and get us out of one or the other of these feedback loops, so that we're not always feeling like we're in conflict. Root causes of conflict. Well, let's start right at the bottom in the yellow box, which is personality clashes. I talked a lot about difficult people. In general, neither one may be difficult, but they may be different types of personality. And so it's still going to create a conflict. Personality clashes. Going up on the left-hand side in the gray box, we have value and also culture clashes. And I've mentioned that there can be lots of differences in our values, even if our common goal of women's equality and the status of women is the same. Different values, different culture. In an international organization such as ours, we may not have so much culture clash at the local level. We may have a little more at the national level when people are coming from north, south, east, west, different regions with different cultures. But also, certainly at the international level, this is an enormous factor and one of the areas that I study a lot about. So culture can be differences regarding time, regarding structure, hierarchy, or an egalitarian approach, direct or indirect ways of communication, and so on. So this is an obvious source of conflict. Ineffective communication, going right up the left-hand side, as I just mentioned, communication also is a source of conflict if it's not effective or open and engaging. Good communication is a lot of listening, active listening, as I mentioned before, deep listening, meaning reflecting back, trying to understand, hearing fully, remembering, not just forming your report or your response. So effective communication skills are critical to leadership, but also often a source of conflict. Organizational change. Well, from the club level on up, we will have changes from time to time, and some may not agree with those changes. Some may like the old way. Some may not see the point of the change. Others may see the necessity of the change, whatever it is. So this is always another source of conflict. Going around to the right, we have, let's skip the work part for a moment, but policies and practices, just as in the workplace. In our organization, we have certain policies. Some may violate those. Some may not agree with certain regulations. And practices are how we actually do things on the ground. And that often is a source of conflict. We have different opinions on how, even if we're sticking to the regulations, on how that should manifest in reality. So this is always a source of conflict as well in organizations particularly. Adversarial management. You can have aggression within the executive. Disagreements, different values, whatever the conflict is, but also adversary, in that management styles can differ. And particularly if someone is very autocratic, if you have a president of a club, for example, who wants to do things all her way, first of all, that's not true leadership. But secondly, that's real conflict. If you have someone on any board who's causing problems, maybe just by not doing their job, you have management, so to speak, in our case, executives who are not representing the wishes of the members or not handling the operations of the organization very well at any level. So there are lots of possible conflicts based on adversarial management. And finally, in this graph, competition for scarce resources. This has been identified a number of times by experts as one of the reasons that women tend toward conflict with each other. We're very good at cooperating and collaborating. That's a particularly female trait, we like to think. We also tend to compete with one another quite a lot and resort to schoolgirl tactics of fighting against each other instead of working together. And human nature is that we'll always do both, but women tend toward this on one hand because they are competing for scarce resources. There are still limited opportunities for women in many cases, on boards, in high levels of management, in politics, and so on, whether the limitations are real or perceived. And so we are still competing with one another, and that may very well be in our organization as well. There is only a certain number of positions on any executive. There are only a certain number of chair positions for committees and task forces. We all by nature tend more toward leadership than toward following, because that's the type of woman who joins an organization like BPW. So these limited resources in terms of leadership or in terms of acknowledgement, in terms of the roles that we can play, is also a source. Stages of development of conflict. This mostly, I think we all are innately aware of, but there are a couple of points to be made here. On the left, we have a rise in intensity. On the bottom, we have over a period of time. Conflicts, generally speaking, tend to rise and they tend to fall. They don't last forever, not even world wars. So they could feel like they're lasting forever. That's different. But what we can acknowledge here particularly is before conflict emerges, this is on the left side of the graph, there's a latent conflict period. And as a leader, you want to develop a keen sense of perception. Be always on the lookout for potential conflict and try to diffuse it before it becomes conflict. Because there is a latent period where if we're keenly observing the way that our members are interacting with one another, the level of satisfaction and dissatisfaction, the sources of value differences and other potential conflicts, then going back to that previous chart, how many of those might apply to your affiliate or your federation as potential sources of conflict? Have you recently had an organizational change, for example? So what are latent conflicts and how can we handle them before they become an issue? Much easier than trying to resolve after, if we recognize it. Escalation, stalemate, when nobody's moving and the conflict is at its peak, it's also important to acknowledge that that's a hurting phase. Nobody's comfortable with that. Even the fighters who like to fight are still not comfortable with that. And it's not going anywhere. So that's when it feels like it's going to last forever, or it's going to break your affiliate or break our organization. And we have had breaks before, as any organization will have from time to time. So that's really a critical point. There is ultimately a de-escalation that involves a negotiation process, get to resolution and a settlement. But it's also important on that right-hand side to acknowledge that once the conflict is over, that's not all. After the conflict ends and you've come to some sort of agreement, there still needs to be a peace-building time. You need to rebuild those relationships, and you need to do it very carefully. And that is where a leader really needs to lead on both ends of this spectrum, identifying conflict before it happens, when it's still in the latent phase, and dealing with the aftermath when a conflict seems to be resolved. And basically it's win-win, everybody happy, or everybody moderately happy at least. Because you need to rebuild those relationships, and that needs to be very carefully nurtured. So what is conflict resolution? Well, we're determining, first of all, the interests of both parties, my interests, their interests, possible outcomes, exploring alternatives, and in the middle of this, whether or not it's legitimate. Some conflicts in the end, and that goes to that long view as well. Will this be important in 5 days? Will it be important in 5 years? Well, that doesn't mean it's completely illegitimate, but maybe it lessens the legitimacy a bit if it's not going to be important, which in fact is true for most conflicts. Some conflicts might be determining the course of your organization, be legitimate. Others are about what venue to use for your next event, not important. After the event, people might be less than happy with it, but it won't determine anything. Legitimacy. And so we have on this next table 2 sides to our graph, which we can see in any conflict and any point of conflict resolution or process of conflict resolution. On the left-hand side, how concerned are we for the issue? That goes back to legitimacy. Do we only have a low concern, only minorly concerned about the issue itself, all the way up to a really major concern, determining the outcome of your organization concern? On the bottom of the graph, we have the concern for the relationship, the one-to-one between groups within all of parts of our organization, any level. When we move up on either or both of these scales, there are different outcomes or different objectives to outcome. If the concern for the issue is low, and also the concern for the relationship is low, then everybody just withdraws or avoids. That's not really an outcome as we saw before. It doesn't resolve the conflict, but the conflict will go away because it's not important to anybody. It's just a temporary conflict. When we go higher on the concern for the issue, if we're not concerned for relationship, that's where we compete. We're going to try to win that conflict. As the relationship also becomes more important, we'll reach a point where we're willing to compromise. The issue is moderately important and the relationship is moderately important. We meet in the middle on all counts, we compromise. The issue is of low importance and the relationship is the most important. We'll accommodate the other person. We'll give in to them because keeping the relationship is much more important. But if the issue is highly important and the relationships are highly important, collaboration is the only way for a win-win situation. So in every conflict, you should use a tool like this. How important is the issue, low, medium, or high? How important is the relationship or cooperation, low, medium, or high? And therefore, you'll know what your goal is. And conflict resolution then looks like this. We identify the problem that's causing the conflict. That's where it begins. That's in the middle right-hand side here. We identify the feelings associated with the conflict so that we are not suppressing them. If you suppress your feelings, they're just going to come out in unhealthy ways. You can't really keep them down. But we have to identify them in order to get past them. I feel hurt in this situation. I feel a bit betrayed. I feel angry. Usually anger, though, is a first defense. So what's beneath the anger? I'm unsettled by this. Whatever the feelings are, we need to identify them in order to move past them to the impact of the problem. If it's low impact, maybe we don't need to resolve the conflict. But if it's a medium or high impact, we'd better put on our boots and get in there and try to resolve it. So the next is decision, whether to resolve or not. Again, low impact, high impact, low value of relationship versus high value, previous chart. If we've decided to resolve, then we work for the resolution. That may seem obvious, but emphasis on the word work. Conflict resolution is work on both sides, all sides. If you're willing to work on it, because everything, both issue and relationship, is of high value to you, then again, put on your boots, roll up your sleeves, whatever metaphor you like, and do the work necessary to resolve the conflict. More on that work in a moment. Some of the elements of conflict resolution then is effectively conveying information, good communication skills, I messages, not you make me feel you did this. That's not helpful. I feel, I think, I would like to consider. Sensitive to people's feelings and polite or respectful to them as a human being. So empathy and respect. Avoiding gossip. Gossip is the worm in the middle of the apple. You are sharing information or conveying the problem to people who are not involved in the solution, then you are spreading the problem. You are growing the problem. Now not a problem between two people or within one club. It's now a problem that's expanded its borders. So avoid that at all costs. Accurately interpreting people's emotions. Don't assume you know how anyone feels. Ask them, explore, discuss, be empathetic, try to get a better sense of their feelings and what's behind their feelings. Remember, looking for the need of the person and calmly arriving at resolutions as a result. Some strategies. Defining acceptable behavior before a conflict. What is and is not acceptable in your club? Basically, what is not? So everything else being acceptable. So figure out in your club or your federation, where is the line? What's not acceptable behavior? Very early on, we should know that, to the degree that if somebody asked us, we could tell them. That maybe we even have posted somewhere as a set of ground rules. This and this and this is not acceptable to us. We'll ask you to leave. Or at the least, we'll have a conflict. Don't avoid conflict. Conflict will always arise. We will always, it's human nature, we will always have, if not just a fight over something, we will always have different opinions and different values. Avoiding is not leadership. I don't know how to put that any more bluntly. It's not leadership. So avoiding is also that feedback loop. The conflict has not resolved at all by avoiding it. Western style, most Western cultures, is to take conflict on head on. Most Eastern cultures tend more to wait a little and go around the conflict, but that's not actually avoiding, to be clear. That's actually more taking the long lens. Let's wait and see if this is important. If it's still important after some time has passed, then we'll approach it more directly. But let's give it time first. And the long view generally is more of an Asian quality than other parts of the world. That's not always the view to take. I'm just saying these aren't as opposite as they look. In any case, we can't just avoid it. It remains. It's just possibly buried, but it's still there. Choose a neutral location. That's obvious. No one should have an advantage in resolving conflict. Start with a compliment, but a genuine, authentically felt compliment on anything. But anything to start on a positive and genuinely, a genuine note of commonality or affection, if you will. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't take mental shortcuts. If you're a leader, you need to be in the habit of thinking deeply and then thinking again, and then reflecting on what you were thinking. So don't jump to any conclusions or quick or judgments. Think opportunistically, not punitively. In resolving conflict, we don't want to think about punishing the other side or the other person if there are sides. We want to think less about there being sides, but to think of it as an opportunity for growth. A process of conflict resolution is an opportunity for you to further develop your leadership skills and for everyone involved to grow a little bit more, to become more mature and more experienced at handling conflict. Opportunity. Offer guidance, not solutions, for a psychologist, for a teacher, a parent, and also a leader. Offering solutions, tying someone's shoes for them is never really authentic. It doesn't get us further along. It's just doing for somebody else. So guidance as a leader helps us all come to our own solutions together. That's also the definition of empowerment, isn't it? So don't just offer solutions, even if you think you can clearly see how this can be resolved. Certainly voice your opinion. That's different. Constructive criticism shouldn't really even be the word criticism, but it's not your way is wrong because that's just criticism. It's more, have you considered this other view? Have you considered maybe if things were just done a little bit differently, you might get a better result? That's leadership. Don't intimidate, ever. The power, so to speak, of your position as a leader should never, ever, ever be abused. That's not good leadership. That's dictatorship. So don't ever intimidate one just because you're in some position of leadership. Never I say so because. Act decisively, however. Don't let people wonder what your opinion is or wonder what you're going to do or if you're doing anything. Indecisiveness is also not leadership. So do be decisive, which is quite different from intimidating or providing solutions. It just is referring to clarity and taking a leadership role, taking a more deliberate role. Sometimes we need mediation, which is a neutral third party. And by neutral, I would say outside of BPW, not just outside of your own club or federation, because they still are part of the same organization. So to be truly neutral, it should ideally be someone who is not associated with BPW. To come in, help to see things more objectively, help to facilitate the conflict. This is when we are unable to resolve it ourselves. And we must remember this, because a lot of times within our organization, if we have not been able to resolve the conflict, then either we lose a member or members, we have an entire club or federation split. It has happened more than one occasion. And we don't often think to go to that next step, which is mediation with a neutral party. Let's look at this. Mediation is called subjective justice. Now, I just said the point of a mediator is that they can be objective, but subjective justice means that they are also assisting in the process of coming to something that's fair for both parties. They're the balancer. The mediation process always begins with ground rules, and classic ground rules are confidentiality. Again, if you're sharing the details with anyone outside of that process, then you have not only broken confidentiality, but no one will speak freely within the process because they have the fear that it will be shared outside. Dialogue. Nothing is a one-way street or an argument. It should be a dialogue. One person at a time, even if your cultural habit, and this is true in many places in the world, is for everyone to speak more or less at once or over one another or interweaving. This process has to be one person at a time, because even though it's dialogue, it's calmly stating, calmly stating, stating, calmly stating. Maintain the calm to deeply listen to one another. It has to be one by one. I statements, I've mentioned a few times. That is so that you don't engender defensiveness in the other person. And also because it's more legitimate. Legitimately, I can tell you what I'm feeling and thinking. And I can feel that it's caused by your actions, but in reality, all I really know is what I'm thinking and feeling. And the cause can be many things. And so for practical purposes of not raising defensiveness, and also more legitimately and truthful to the process. Statements only from your own perspective. And solution-focused conversations. He did this, she did that, this happened in the past, this was wrong, this violates our regulations or constitution. All valid, but not helpful. So a mediator will focus on these ground rules and keep both parties or all parties focused on them. The last being to focus in a future direction. How do we resolve this means focusing on resolve is solution. There's a statement of the issues, which is a recap that's usually done by the mediator because the mediator will have pre-session planning meetings with each of the parties. Hear their side without the other party present. So the mediator will state the issues, restate the issues. The definition of the issues, why this is causing such conflict. That can come also from the individual parties involved. And not you did this or I didn't do that, but just a clear, calm, hopefully, a definition of why the conflict is there. What is actually the nature of the conflict? Developing alternatives that must be realistic, attainable, and agreeable. Coming to some conclusion, we hope, or compromise or agreement, and then a follow-up period to see that that's carried through. The steps look like this. There is that planning phase in which everyone's making their plan, but basically this means the mediator meeting with each of the sides individually. And then in the beginning, the mediator is getting to know participants, outlining the problems, stating the ground rules, the goals. That's all determined in the planning and then becomes the mediator's role. Opening remarks by each of the parties involved. And the remarks are like opening remarks in a court case. They're just stating the situation as they see it, one by one. Then there's a joint discussion. Again, one by one discussion, but together. Then there may be caucuses, which is again back to individual meetings with each party and the mediator, if necessary. And finally, a period of negotiation to come to resolution. This can also look like this. This is just another model for the same process. I'm just going to touch on a couple of points here. One is on the left-hand side. We're going from past to future. First half of the process, more or less, is understanding and exploring the issues from all points of view, without those points of view attacking each other anymore. So it's looking at all the different perspectives, and the mediator is one by one going through those different perspectives, whether you have two parties or many more parties. And the second half needs to then focus on the future, which is problem solving and reaching resolution. So we're moving from a focus on the past to a focus on the future. And also that there's that post-mediation period of enforcing agreements. We all know from our political and advocacy roles that governments often agree to many things and then don't actually do them. So this can happen in mediation as well. There's an agreement with any luck, finally, and closure to the process, but then there's an aftercare period in which we have to ensure that all parties are following through on what was agreed upon. The role of the mediator, first of all, is to serve as a neutral facilitator. That's the beauty of a mediator. Secondly, to assist in generating, in creating, and also clarifying the options. In every process of conflict resolution, there are various options, and to explore those together, that's the role of the mediator. To summarize, restate, and prioritize issues, this is a lot like psychotherapy, which is my field. From time to time in the process and in the discussion among the parties involved, the mediator will summarize what's been said so far. This is also to keep things clear and objective. We'll restate. Party A said blah, blah, blah. Party B then said blah, blah, blah. And to prioritize. What I'm hearing is that this is a key priority for both of you, while this and this are lesser priorities, and this nobody's mentioned. Maybe it's not really a goal after all. Enforcing those ground rules. If anybody strays and starts to say, you did this, you made me that, for example, then to enforce that. I want to remind everyone of the ground rules, no cross-talking, no, please keep to I statements. Let's keep our focus on solutions. Evaluating options and possible consequences that maybe the parties who are still involved emotionally can't really see, and the neutral mediator can say, I see an option here and here. I see this possible outcome of that option. So again, neutrality helps them to see the situation more clearly and to identify areas of mutual interest. What I'm hearing is that all parties have this interest in common. Maybe we can focus first on that, and so on. Strategies by the mediator are to generally have rapport. Rapport includes empathy for all the parties involved. They're all human beings with needs, and good communication skills. That's basically my definition of rapport. Creativity. On the spot in the sessions, you have to become pretty creative and look for other alternatives, other options constantly to help these parties come to resolution. Patience, a lot of patience as a mediator. It takes time. It's a process. You don't have any stake in the game, but your role is to facilitate it so that everyone is satisfied with the outcome and the conflict is resolved. It's a huge responsibility. Neutrality, of course, and also boundaries. This is not acceptable, and so we need to keep those. Participants should also solicit the mediator's opinion. From time to time, mediator, what do you think about blah, blah, blah? What do you think about this? And to offer their own ideas. Wait a minute, I'm thinking we could look at this that we haven't thought about yet, and it might have this outcome or that outcome. And participants must also take a reality test, which is, are they the problem? Are they creating some block that's preventing resolution in this conflict? Ultimately, we go from dispute through a process of negotiation. This is with dealing with difficult people, conflict resolution, or mediation. We then come to, if we're skilled as well as lucky, compromise. Compromise is that negotiation process, right? People are giving in a little bit on each side, not just one side. Agreement, and of course, resolution. Or as I like to call it, how to love difficult. So thank you for listening to this webinar today. We hope that it's helpful for you as leaders try to deal with difficult people, resolve conflict, and sometimes even act as a mediator, as the neutral party in conflicts maybe in other parts of our organization or elsewhere. Thank you again for listening, and we hope to see you in one of our upcoming webinars very soon. Bye for now.